What's going on, everybody? It is TripleCrown24 back today with a new episode of the Sports Card Psychology Podcast, where we go inside the mind of the hobby. Appreciate you joining me this week. I was off last week just preparing for the Nashville show, dealing with some other business related endeavors, but I am back and ready to go this week, taking away something from that Nashville show that I thought would be a great video topic today. And I will apologize in advance to my podcast listeners who are listening audio only, or perhaps you're listening to this on the car via YouTube and you can't look over, because today's episode is going to require some visuals just due to the subject matter. But I will do my best to use as descriptive of a term as I can when going through today's subject, which is talking about this feeling of being overwhelmed in the hobby. And that was one of the most common answers I received at the show this past weekend when I asked people how their show was going, is that they were overwhelmed or they had a lot to take in, or commenting about the size of the show and how much larger the show was compared to its previous installment in July, which I was also set up at, which gave me some frame of reference in order to really consider the differences between the two shows. And I agree, this show was massive. It is, outside of the National and the Dallas Card Show, the largest that I have personally attended in terms of, I guess, just the overall square footage and the volume of tables at this show, as well as all of the different vendors there. But it really struck a chord with me when I heard so many people talking about how they were overwhelmed, or telling me how they only had been able to make it through a certain section of the card show. They were only able to get through the first couple of rows on Friday, and they said, I got to pick up the pace if I want to get through everything else on Saturday and Sunday, or even if they were just there for a couple of days, just getting through it in those few days. And I thought to myself, I kind of feel that way too. There were so many tables that I never got to see, even though I got to walk the floor a little bit. A lot of areas I never got to even glance at. And those places that I glanced at probably missed out on several things that I would have liked to have possibly inquired about. But that's just kind of the nature of one of these shows, is that there are a lot of vendors and not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things when you want to really analyze everything there. If you drop me in a 60 table or 80 table show and give me 4 or 5 hours to go through it, I can comb through it pretty well in my experiences going as a buyer, just to kind of get a lay of the land, figure out what everybody has, which cards I'm interested in, which dealers I want to try to work out a deal with, et cetera, et cetera. In a show of this scope, that becomes exponentially more difficult to do. There are the bigger name dealers that are going to be there. Your ones that are advertised ahead of time. Same thing goes with any other big regional show. Usually those types of dealers, you'll know that they'll be there. But then there are the guys who maybe are just setting up for the first time on a whim, or the guys who have missed a couple of shows and all of a sudden they're back. There are a lot of choices. And among those dealers, the cards that they are offering themselves are all over the place. And today I'm going to show you what I mean by that. That's why I referenced the visual examples earlier on. I used Ryan Breakout Cards video as a reference. The last time around, that is going to be no different today. I am going to pull this up here. This is a video. I opened it in incognito so that it didn't bring up a bunch of suggested things that would distract from the video here. Let me go ahead and drop myself down. There we go. So here you see, this is as plain as I can get it. I can't go full screen, unfortunately, but I want you to go ahead and take a look at the showcase. And for any of you who are watching on YouTube, you probably don't even need to take a look at the showcase. You are already doing that. And there's probably a lot of you as well who are hearing what I'm saying to you, and maybe you're not fully hearing what I'm saying. Maybe you're somewhat distracted by looking at all the cards in the showcase, or you haven't looked at the showcase because you're too busy focusing on what I'm trying to say to you. That goes into my point here is that when you're at a card show like this, there are going to be a lot of sounds going on. There are conversations going on at a lot of different tables, people negotiating, people just talking about whatever in general. There's different smells, some good, like maybe there's a concession stand and you smell, yeah, there was a bunch of people who were getting soft pretzels at the show and they smelled really good. Let me tell you, and that was a bit distracting at times, was the smell of the concession stands. Or there's also the unpleasant smells. We don't have to get into that. You guys know what I'm talking about. Uh, but there's all of that. There is all of the visuals that are going on. Everybody's got their brightly colored banners and their display cases, and there are a lot of people in there too. You may accidentally bump into people, especially at these more crowded shows, depending on how the foot traffic is. If the aisles are not wide enough, you may need to squeeze through people and make incidental contact with people as a result of trying to navigate the aisles of a certain show. There are a lot of different stimuli that you can run into at a card show. And what I mean by stimuli is something that could potentially trigger a reaction to you, and mostly a neurological reaction where you need to be able to process it. So if you touch someone on accident, in accidental contact, your first instinct is usually to uh, remove yourself from that contact. Or if you're looking for a specific card in one of these showcases, you are looking at all the different cards and trying to process, is this what I'm looking for? Yes or no. And these are things that happen. You don't have to think about them, right? They're natural. They happen within milliseconds. It's not like it's this long drawn out process that I am explaining. And I'm just trying to slow it down a little bit to give you an idea. And at the same time, you're processing conversations. You're trying to filter out when people are saying something, is it relevant to you? Are they speaking to you? Are they speaking to someone else? The smells that you're smelling, you can also be trying to perceive, is this a smell of danger? If there was, say, a gas leak, just something extremely out there, or if there was a something was on fire and you smelled smoke, that could be something that is alarming as well. Perhaps there's an unpleasant smell where you want to move away from that because you don't want to have to deal with that unpleasant smell. These are all types of things that are going through. And at the same time, you're trying to navigate this card show and look for cards to buy. And I made it sound like it is all these distractions constantly going on. And yes, not all these things are major distractions. Thankfully, the human body doesn't get caught up on every single stimuli that approaches us, because otherwise we would never get anything done. But there is a lot to pay attention to at a card show. And these things do add up. And when all of these senses are coming together and all of these uh, processes are happening concurrently, it can create what is called sensory overload. And I believe that this is one of the biggest culprits, if not the biggest culprit, in why so many people feel perhaps fatigued in the hobby, they feel anxious about the hobby, or they feel overwhelmed, as the title of this podcast episode suggests. Let me tell you what I mean by sensory overload. It is basically the body's ability to process, or the mind's ability to process, I should say, all the stimuli that is being presented to it all at the same time. And it becomes to a point where there are too many signals being sent to the mind, where we enter what is kind of known as fight or flight mode. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. There's really three. It's fight, flight, or freeze, where fight would be you confront whatever the stimuli may be. Freeze would be that you don't do anything at all. And flight would be that you try to avoid or move away from whatever that stimuli may be. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical reaction, as I may be saying. So, for example, here, I'm showing you that this showcase, by the way, you're probably still been somewhat distracted by looking at this showcase if you're watching on YouTube, all the different cards. I'm looking for a Trey Lance card, for example, at this show. Let's pretend that I'm Ryan at this show and I'm looking for a Trey Lance card. And I look through this case. So the very first card in the upper right corner I look at is that Derrick Henry kaboom. It's difficult to see on the video, but I can tell that's what it is. I'm not looking for that. There's a Joe Montana kaboom. Nope. So I'm keeping going through and I'm going through all these cards in my head. I'm just going, nope, nope, nope. That's not what I'm looking for. And bam, right there in the middle, there's that Trey Lance autograph there. So I have identified that this is a Trey Lance card. And from there, I'm probably going to identify, is this a Trey Lance card that I am interested in? Well, it's a Contenders rookie auto. I don't have one of those. Yeah, I'm interested in it. It's raw. I would prefer if it's graded. So I'm not as interested now. Let me check the price. Oh, the price is kind of high. All right, I'm not interested anymore. Move along, keep looking. All right, that's the only Trey Lance card I'm done with this table. That's just an example of something that's going on. Now, if you're someone who's looking for a lot of different things, if your focus is not so narrow, then it becomes overwhelming because now if I'm saying, all right, I'm looking for Trey Lance, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, like all the quarterbacks that people ask for, now I got to go through each of those as I look through. Like Derrick Henry, is Derrick Henry on my list? No. All right. Joe Montana, is Joe Montana on my list? No. Oh, but I kind of like kabooms. Let me look at the kabooms again. It's just one of those things where the more that you add in terms of what you're looking for, especially those who may be on the resale side of things, or they're just looking to flip a certain card, that means that you're not really focusing on any particular set. You're just looking for something that you can make money on. And of course, we all have our niches. If you're, especially if you're a reseller, there are certainly different sports or players that you may be looking at because you are more familiar with those markets. But if you're trying to keep as wide of a scope as possible and keep all options on the table, that means that you have to process a lot more information when you're going through. So, really, this is something that favors collectors because, well, you're looking for certain things. And oftentimes you can make it easier on yourself with certain things, or the dealers may make it easier on you. Uh, but that's not always the case. And when that's not always the case, that's when the sensory overload comes into play. Is because if you're looking at all these cards, especially in today's hobby landscape, I've heard this several times before where people say that all these cases look the same, right? Like all these vintage cases look the same. It's the same players from the same sets, or all these ultra modern cases are all these quarterbacks. It's Allen, Herbert, Burrow, Lamar Jackson, all these guys who I keep seeing over and over and over. And I keep seeing these same base prism rookies and these white sparkles and these blue flashes and all these different parallels. And there's just too many parallels to process. That's when it becomes overwhelming because you have to process all of this different information. And the hobby has definitely not made it easier with the introduction of more and more parallels and more sets. It just adds more and more for your mind to filter out in terms of what you are looking for. It may be a very quick snap decision like, no, I'm not looking for that. I'm not looking for that, especially the more focused that you may be. But it does add up because, again, you're processing things that are just beyond your sight sense. There are other senses that are going on. Even if they're not currently active, they are always prepared. Taste is one of those that maybe not so much. We're not out here licking cards. Perhaps if you have your water bottle there with you or you're drinking a energy drink or an adult beverage, whatever the case may be, then yeah, maybe taste comes into play. That one's not as big of a deal. But certainly your other senses could all be activating at the same time when you are trying to process all this. And it becomes very tiring. Someone like myself, I am an introvert, self professed introvert. And oftentimes when I go to large shows like this, I feel drained at the end of it. And this goes for any large event. If I go to a sporting event or I go to a social gathering, it could be whatever kind of social gathering you can think of. Oftentimes, during it or after it, I will feel a bit physically drained just from being in those environments, and it's one of those feelings where it is more so has to do with me, just because all the social interaction I'm not as used to, and it's something that I just don't process as well as other people who may be more extroverted. So, for example, at the end of the day for a lot of these shows or at the trade night, sometimes I would just bounce because I felt that sensory overload where I had just done too many deals and talked to so many people that it had fatigued me to that point. And everybody has a different threshold for how much of this they can tolerate. There are people who they're nonstop 24/7 and they might feed off the energy of other people. If that's the case, and they probably really enjoy being in these larger crowds and being around other people, and they try to engage with it as much as possible. For me, I'm not that way. That's just the way that I am personally wired. But that is probably something that is a sentiment that is shared by other collectors out there. For those of you who are also introverted like myself, then you probably feel that. And it doesn't mean that it is very black and white one way or another. There are people who are extroverted who may also feel drained. There are different levels of extroversion out there. I'm not completely an introvert. There are times where I enjoy the company of others, but there are also times where I enjoy my solitude. And there is varying levels of that. Uh, Naturally, as humans, we're social creatures, but there are different tolerances, as I referenced a little bit earlier on, and that is what I think ties into this is that whenever you approach a table, you are constantly being greeted by people. I mean, my whole row at this show, pretty much all the dealers there, I knew them, and they always greet you whenever they walk up. And maybe you might run into someone you know on the show floor. That's certainly something that happens to me doing a lot of the shows. Is that I'll see another dealer that I know, or perhaps someone recognizes me from YouTube. That doesn't happen all that often. It's mostly customers who I've met in the past or other dealers who I've met in the past, but it does happen from time to time. And when that happens, you're constantly having those interactions. And if you're looking through these showcases, when a lot of these cards may look similar, especially with all the different parallels, it can make it very easy to get lost in the shuffle. It can make it a lot more difficult to differentiate certain things. And after a while, it may all become a blur. Like when I'm going through this showcase here that I'm showing you of Ryan, I see these kabooms and I just kind of recognize the kaboom pattern. And if I'm looking specifically for kaboom cards, which they do jump out to me, that's one of the things that jumps out to me the most. Like if I close my eyes right now and I open them back up, the first thing that jumps out to me is the Trey Lance autograph and then the two kabooms. Why? Because I like contenders autographs. I like the kabooms. After that, I see the Josh Allen rookie over there on the side. And I can instantly recognize that just because I've seen that image so many times that it has become ingrained in me. Or I can tell you right away that there is the Dalvin Cook optic right next to the Trey Lance. That's something else that jumps out to me. The other ones I have to look a little bit closer at, like the one next to the Josh Allen is a Trevor Lawrence card from Absolute. It looks like it's a red parallel. That's one that I have to pay a bit more attention to because I don't see that one as often. I can generally tell though that it's Trevor Lawrence. The one next to it, I can't really tell from right here. Looking at this video, I don't recognize who that is right off the top of my head. I look at my other screen here off to the right, the one that is not the screen recording you guys are seeing. I can see the signature. Now I recognize that is Elijah Moore. So, how we're able to process things, it kind of depends on our past experiences as well. If you're going to these shows as often as someone like me or someone like Ryan at Breakout Cards, then there are probably certain cards where just even the texture or the colors that you see you are able to instantly identify what it is or at least what set it's from. And that's something that's been helpful for me in kind of coming through showcases quickly where I know exactly what I'm looking for and I can kind of spot it at a quick glance and allows me to move through things faster. Is it perfect? Do I get thrown off sometimes? No, of course it's not perfect, but it does help in my process at least. And a lot of times I'm looking for something that stands out. If I see something that I haven't seen before or something that looks like it's out of the ordinary, I pick up on that. And it becomes natural instinct to look at the things that seem off or seem unusual. For example, I'm going to show you my showcases now. I appreciate Ryan for lending me his video there. He doesn't know that this is coming out, but I I was looking for a video that showed a good example of a showcase where I could try to identify things from afar, and his video here was a good one. This is his Aaron Judge collection video. If you guys want to go check that out after after I finish up here on the show. But here's a look at one of my showcases. And again, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see here if you're listening on podcast. But right away, think to yourself, what is the first thing that stands out? I'm going to see if I can make it a little. All right. Didn't make it any clearer there. But to me, what stood out is the sealed pack, the Parasect Pokemon card there, and then the Derrick Henry. Now, there is a little bit of bias here because these cards are front and center. They're the ones that are the easiest to distinguish among all of them here, and part of that is because of the angle that I'm looking at it. But this very well could be an angle. Like, does this look like an angle of you perhaps looking at a showcase? For me, yeah, I usually notice the cards at the bottom of the showcase or the top of the showcase. It's kind of one of those things with recency bias or primacy bias where you look at the first or the last object in a data set. Well, it's the same thing here where I'm looking at the things that are the closest from me or the farthest away from me. I'm not going to start like right in the middle and then work one way or another. I like to keep it linear. As humans, we like things that are linear, or at least our minds do. But I can't tell you how many times that the Derrick Henry booklet and the Yu-Gi-Oh pack were things that caught people's eye, and especially the Yu-Gi-Oh pack. There were people there who don't know a thing about Yu-Gi-Oh, or perhaps they know very little. They're not even interested in collecting it, but they stopped and looked at it and thought that was cool. Even if they didn't tell me that they were looking at it, I can tell by their eyes where they're looking what caught their eye, or at least to have a really good guess of what it might be because it's unusual. It's something that you might not see every day. Now, what also makes it unusual is that there aren't too many unusual cards in my showcase. At a very quick glance here, you can kind of identify maybe some ultra modern football sets that are there at the top, or even modern football sets. And yeah, I have a lot of Herbert and Burrow cards that are in the showcase there, as you will see. But because those are there and those are more so in line with what you're seeing around the show, it helps my more unique items stand out. And do I do it this way intentionally? Somewhat. I like to have things that are frequently requested, but I also like to have my unique pieces as well on top of it. And it kind of goes both ways. So having a healthy balance is something that I personally strive for. Because I want to have different unique items that catch people's attention, but I also want to be somewhat reliable in the sense that I will carry cards of the more asked about names that people are generally looking for at these shows. That's why I highlight the what was hot, what was not segments during my card show recap videos. But to that end, there is value in having those more unique pieces. They also may not be as liquid. That's kind of one of the key words out there now, liquid. But they could serve multiple purposes. If it catches the eye and it draws someone over to the table, perhaps then they notice one of my more easy to find items in the case that they are looking for, and I can make a sale from there. So that's something that I try to do. Is my case perfect and the greatest way to deal with the sensory overload of the show? No, it is not, because a lot of what I carry in essence is random and unique. Even though I do have the more common stuff, there is still a bit of randomness to my case, but I try to keep it somewhat organized. And that kind of leads into the wrap up of this episode. I always like to make these videos or these shows constructive, where we can identify something that may be potentially a problem or try to understand why things are the way they are. And then also, how are some different ways that we could respond to them? So in this case, a bit of problem solving. How can we respond to sensory overload and reducing our feelings of anxiety or feeling overwhelmed, or trying to make it a smaller world in a sense if we're attending a show or looking for cards online? Because a lot of what I have talked about today has been very physical in the sense of going to a card show, or perhaps this could apply to going to a card shop, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can also be through social media. if you have a card Instagram account or a Twitter account and you're scrolling through, you are constantly uh, being exposed to different images that send different signals to your brain looking through the cards. Perhaps the decision then becomes, do I want to make an offer on this card if it's in a for sale or a for trade thread on Twitter or something? Or do I want to double tap and like this photo if it's on Instagram? Do I want to leave a comment? What is this that is being shown off? Do I need to read the caption that goes along with it? So there are different kinds of decisions that may be different depending on your context of what you were looking at hobby wise, but it still happens and it can still contribute to this feeling of being overwhelmed or feeling that the overexposure is becoming too much to process. So, what can we do to combat that? Well, if you were looking to purchase cards or to sell cards, I have a few tips. In terms of purchasing cards, going to a show, if you have specific things that you are looking for, ask the dealer because a lot of times they will ask you, is there anything that you're looking for? Who do you like to collect? Is there anything I can help you with? A lot of those welcoming questions that open dialogue between customer and dealer. And if there is something, let us know because I'll tell you right now. If you tell me I'm looking for this, I can tell you right away if I have it or not. And sometimes we have stuff that isn't even put out on display, so uh, we can bring it out for you and basically present it right to you, kind of in a way that you can get exactly what you're looking for via a search engine if you are using eBay or some other online card purchasing platform. The search engine functionality can exist in real life too. It just depends on how you approach it. So that is one way to combat it. And oftentimes you can try to figure out how a dealer has their case structured. This more so goes to a selling tip if you're someone who is a dealer, whether it's online or in person. And that is make it consistent and make it as easy to navigate as possible. If you have cards of the same player, try to put those next to each other in your showcase. Or if you're in a online thread, if you're say on Twitter, there you can post up to 4 cards on a post. And a lot of times, a lot of the sales threads on Twitter are themed. So that does help in keeping things more so congruent. But oftentimes, I'll try to keep my stuff to the same types of cards. They're all PSA graded cards, for example, or they are all baseball cards, as another example. Keep it somewhat congruent and consistent so that people know exactly kind of what they're getting. Do you have to follow it strictly to a T? No. And there's not going to be there's no perfect system for it, of course, and you have to be flexible for what you are dealing with. But there are ways to make it easier on the consumer, and it also increases your chances of making a sale. If people can find what they are looking for, it opens the opportunity for that sale to occur. Whereas if they don't see it, that opportunity is taken off the board. And perhaps you have something that they're looking for, but they are just unable to locate it for whatever reason. And it may not even be no fault of your own, but there are ways to navigate it. And also, again, if you are the dealer, open up that line of dialogue for buyers. Figure out what they are looking for. Perhaps you may get the just browsing answer, which is a common response to. And in that case, let them browse. They will go through things. Usually, if they have a uh, prolonged presence at my table or they seem to be fixated on a certain item in my case, I will ask them, is there anything catching your eye? Is there anything that you'd like to take a look at? And then from there, it can kind of help open up that line of dialogue. And uh, perhaps even if they have something that they look at that they don't like, you may have a card that is similar to that one that you can offer to them and make a sale. That is something that has happened to me before, both as a buyer and as a seller. So that's a way that you can do that. Another way would be to know what you're looking for going into it, have a shopping list, and also have a notepad. I carry around a notepad with me, and some people think it's kind of goofy. It is what it is. Some people think it's incredibly official or whatever, but that's just so that I know what I am looking at. And what I will often do is I will go through a row. I'll write down the things that I'm interested in, unless it's a screaming deal right there where I don't want to miss out on it, then I will just write it down. I will go step aside, regroup, and then reprocess, because I may not also be thinking logically when you get into the heat of the moment. You're thinking about buying a card, and perhaps with all the different stimuli going on around you, it makes it difficult to really think. So I go to a quieter space. If it's in a hotel, perhaps they step outside into the lobby for a second, go over my notes and check prices and see if it's something that I might be interested in, or I might cross things off by second thought, saying, "Nah, I'm not actually really interested in this. I thought I was, but it's more so just a quick pass in my mind where I'm no longer interested in it." Keeping track of those things and perhaps putting it on paper will help out. It doesn't have to be pen and paper. It can be on your phone too. You can type it out on a notes app or something, and then go and check it out later on. There are different ways to do it, but that is something that I have found has helped me in my decision making process and has ultimately allowed me to walk away from deals that I probably would have otherwise made and potentially regretted, or not have gotten out of it what I had initially hoped for when trying to negotiate for a certain card in the first place. So that is something else that I like to do. Online, you can more so filter out what you are looking for. You can only follow accounts that appeal directly to you. For me, I'm more specific in what accounts I like to follow on Instagram and Twitter. I don't follow a large number of accounts, but I try to curate the content to what best fits my hobby experience. I don't like to mute or disclude things that might be conflicting views, but I do tend to gravitate towards people who may be like minded, just like anyone else would be, or people who post content that is visually appealing to me, mentally appealing to me, emotionally appealing to me, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of one of the ways that you can navigate that. Also, with eBay searches, casting a wide net is great in order to open up your opportunities, but more specific search engine uh, results can also be beneficial. If you put in more keywords, you can filter out what you are looking for more and more, or you can use that left hand column if you're on the desktop version. I believe it's like the little right sidebar or toolbar if you're on mobile. At least that's how it is for me on the eBay app on my iPhone, where you can filter by different categories or conditions or grades or whatever the case may be. Use those tools to your advantage to filter things out so that you don't become overwhelmed by the search results out there. May it cause you to miss out? Yes, it could potentially cause you to miss out. But if you, and we've talked about FOMO before on this show and how it may lead to anxieties there, but if the anxiety of sensory overload is overmatching, no pun intended, the anxiety of missing out, then that may be a time to reconsider things in terms of your approach and in terms of navigating whatever sphere you may be in hobby wise. So, I hope that you enjoyed this video today. I really felt passionate about this topic and incredibly curious as well when people were telling me about this sensory overload, their experiences. They didn't call it that, but I had felt that previously. My first time going to the National, I felt that way, just being overwhelmed and just looking at showcases and going down an aisle, and I don't even remember what I just looked at. Those kind of feelings, and I'm sure a lot of us have felt overwhelmed at some point, even if it's not hobby related, at some point in life. And hopefully, this is something that we can use as a tool to understand why we feel that way, and also to figure out methods that work for us as individuals to uh, perhaps not totally eliminate sensory overload, but manage it and understand our own unique ways of dealing with all those different stimuli that may present themselves to us in the hobby, especially in a hobby that has as many different avenues in all facets of the hobby as we see in 2022. So that is today's episode. Thank you again so much for listening. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below on the YouTube side of things, or you can reach out to me on any of my social platforms via my Linktree link. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, stay safe, be kind.